Now, I mentioned experimentation. Let me share a little bit of personal testimony. In 2020, February of 2020, right, actually, let me back up. In January of 2020, I was teaching sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And the school that I was working at and still am working at had just opened in 2016. So it was a brand new school. I basically had complete freedom in the curriculum that I could construct and the methods that I could use to teach. Now, this was a lot of work, but this is a separate story, but extremely synchronistic as to my own personality. I work best when I have complete freedom. This is why school didn't really work too well for me. And anyway, I was working with sixth, seventh, and eighth grade teachers. And we had a kind of a co-teaching situation. And one of the seventh grade co-teacher was, I knew, extremely unhappy. They'd moved from high school down to seventh grade, and seventh grade is arguably developmentally the most difficult grade. And so, this person basically notified me in January that they were going to quit and that they were going to move to another school. And I said, okay, well, good luck. And I hope, I wish them well and thank them for letting me know. And basically what happened was I was determined to be the person who could take on this teacher's entire class load, in addition to also helping out with the other this sixth and eighth grade teachers. That angered me. I was not happy about that, and I was lashing out to students because the situation was one in which I co-taught some classes with this teacher, but the other classes were the ones that I now had to take on. And those classes were singly taught by this teacher, and the teacher was totally checked out and didn't really want to teach, didn't discipline the kids, didn't properly construct lessons. The lessons weren't engaging, et cetera, et cetera. I had to now construct new lessons for these classes. I had to deal with the unruly, unfocused kids, and amid, extreme a developmentally difficult time period for them. And I basically lost all empathy for students and approached the situation tyrannically. That was what I needed to do to stabilize the classes. This was energetically extremely expensive. And of course, psychologically also very damaging, because I'm not I'm not really angry by disposition. Anger is a very rare emotion for me. And so my body reacts quite, there's physiological reactions to my own anger. And I was experiencing anger for about a month straight on a daily basis, quite intense. Well, this, conveniently enough, immunocompromised me. And I began to feel a little bit more feeble. You're on your feet all day. You're speaking a lot. You're yelling. I'm working after hours and things like that. And, I get this flu-like symptoms. I have to take a couple of days off. We didn't really have any substitutes, so I was getting annoyed by the school and like, when are you coming back? I took 2 days off. I came right back, even though I really wasn't well enough to come back full throttle. It's not like you sit at your little desk and you type up, manipulate spreadsheets, right? You got to be student facing. You got to have eyes on all these 30 kids in the class. Again, teaching in middle school is very, very energetically expensive. Anyway, I, resumed my anger, and I got even more sick right after. It happened to be a very severe bout of pneumonia. I'd never had pneumonia before. I had severe symptoms, severe. I was bedridden for 2 weeks. I was coughing up large amounts of phlegm and blood. I couldn't eat for days on end. I had vertigo while sitting still. I could barely sleep. I was losing weight. I was having, extremely dark thoughts. This was, February of 2020, at the end of, February to March. I had, I probably should have gone to the hospital, but, we were being advised not to because of this COVID outbreak that was just happening. And I mean, looking back on it, had I, shall we say, lost the will to live, I would have ceased to live. My body would have ceased viability. And this I was almost certain about. Now, I had one night I essentially pleaded to the universe itself, how can I get well? How can I get well, please? After I woke up after a horrible nightmare, this is one of these interdimensional nightmares, and the message I received was the function of the illness, which was a fundamental humbling. And this is one function of illness. But I started to think about illness metaphysically. I started to think, well, I knew about metacausation back then. I just hadn't put the pieces together. I hadn't really understood that symptomologies are actually that double as symbologies of programming. Now, the programming, once again, is proto-computational, involves all these, involves strata of syntax and different self-dual teledynamic operators whose body complexes are the only things being studied, and that's why we're so confused about why illnesses occur, why certain people get sick, why other people don't, while some people go into remission, some people, the cancer recurs, etc. This all seems quite random and mechanical. It's a weird mixture. It's a randomized, mechanized sort of mixture. And that's because we haven't generalized body complexes to body, mind, spirit complexes, etc. I knew all that, but I hadn't integrated that. And I hadn't, made the connection that all the anger and lack of humility and lashing out and disdain for the teaching profession, the structure of school, for the students and beyond, because it was definitely extending to society. I mean, you look around society, and society is stupidly structured. And this is obvious, but this is not the correct approach. This approach is arrogant, and arrogance is it's an advanced form of ignorance. And this was something that I was also aware of mentally, but I wasn't actually reconfiguring my personality and my behaviors according to this. Now, of course, this might seem like, oh, well, if you step out of line and do bad things, then you get sick. It is not that simple. It is much subtler than that. Every single body, mind, spirit complex has unique proto-computational programming. Unique, which means that if you want to try to replicate experiments and studies, medical studies, you're going to come up short. You're never going to be able to. Now, of course, there are correlations and there are connections, but metacausation is neither mechanical nor randomized. And so, this is fundamentally going to prove frustrating to those of us who've been dealing with scientific method purely. And even the axiomatic method, actually, because axioms are not proven. They're just definitions that are stipulated into existence and can be as easily just, discarded as assumptions, right? Mathematics has no ontological power as it stands, right? Mathematics doesn't tell you why math exists, etc. Doesn't tell you why abstract objects or axioms exist, etc. So anyway, this is going to be fundamentally frustrating, but we have to also understand that the frustration is itself a symptom and a symbol. Of what? Well, you have to decide for yourself what it is in your case. But in my case, this pneumonia was fundamentally humbling, and I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm not trying to avoid illness. I want to learn from the programming. Okay, and since my mind complex, my conscious mind complex was not adequately registering the fact that I needed to reconfigure this personality attribute, namely arrogance, which led to anger and lashing out and disdain, it was given to my body. It was bestowed, shall we say, on my body complex. And it was bestowed in a way that it was extremely visceral and painful. Since then, I have proactively reconfigured that arrogance, converting it into humility, and of course, other, vortical virtues we can say of the open heart, namely appreciation and valor, because it took, the ancillary function was to induce valor on me. I've always been quite physically sensitive, but this was so comprehensively painful I haven't really done it justice in how I described it, but it was so painful that I had to toughen up. I was kind of being a weakling in a way, in the way that I was approaching it. So, since then, I resolved to tightly and conscientiously tune my personality to my spirit complex programming. And this comes in the form of emotions, day-to-day emotions, which figure into intentions, which figure into perceptions. The perceptions, you can think of spirit complex configurations as emotions. Emotions then can be selectively reinforced through intentions. They're charged through intentions. We're using metaphorical language, of course. We want to access as many audiences as we can. And those intentions, when acted upon, well, first of all, they cause perceptions. And when acted upon, basically, correspond to interactions that then are receptions of those, they parameterize new emotions. And then we have this, metaphysical circulatory system, as it were, between emotions, perception, intentions, and perceptions. And this, circulatory system is something that I'm constantly tuning and titrating. Why? In service to others. I have my motivation has become completely intrinsic.